Hello and welcome to the 495. I'm your host, Doug Sparks, editor-in-chief of Merrimack Valley Magazine. I'm here with Lou Blasi. Lou, how are you doing this week?
Doing very well. Been a busy morning, but I'm doing okay.
Bit busy. The bridge to come this way was blocked, and you had to backtrack.
Yeah. See, on both ends of my ride here from Plum Island, I've got 2 or 3 miles of the only way to get there is one road.
Yeah.
And this, the one bridge across the river was shut down today.
Yeah.
Just going my way, by the way, just going over.
It's tough.
From south to north.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. We have to do this thing called commuting. If it was up to me, I would walk or bike to work because I just think it's healthy. It's good for you. I know it's not practical. Yeah. I know you have to live in, whatever, like Amsterdam or something if you really want this to happen. But I still dream about it and I think about it. And I love like walking literature. I love, novels that have to do with walking and writing having to do with walking and the science of this. And there's a whole bunch of books that have come out recently on how good it is for you to walk. And obviously in COVID, it's a very safe activity to be out walking around by yourself. And it's, and so this is the final production week for the September issue of Merrimack Valley Magazine. And we have an article there written by someone from Phillips Academy on the Bay Circuit Trail, which is the Emerald Ring. It's a walking trail that makes a ring. No, it's actually a ring around Greater Boston.
Oh, in Greater Boston.
So it starts up where you live, and it goes all the way. I can't remember where it ends,
but
it's
all connected.
It's like 250 miles.
Wow.
Well, it's all connected, kind of.
Yeah.
Except try walking on it, because you will find yourself, and you're like, oh, this. Like I did. So I read the article and I was inspired. So I decided to do Chelmsford, where I live, to Concord on the BCT. And part of it is the Bruce Freeman Trail. That part's easy. That part's beautiful. And then all of a sudden it ends. And you're just in this place and you don't know if cops are going to come out and arrest you. You're just in this like dirt field all of a sudden. And there's barbed wire everywhere. Yeah. And it just, like we thought we were going to get arrested.
It's like the end of a Scorsese movie.
Yeah. And so we just kept walking randomly down roads trying to go in the direction we thought was Concord Center, and then eventually saw some little sign that said BCT. We were actually on the trail. We had accidentally stayed on the trail. Ended up doing 15 miles, and then this weekend I just did the part that goes from Harold Parker to Boxford State Forest, which is 10 miles.
Yep.
Because it's not 10 miles this way, but it's 10 miles the way you actually have to do it, which is like this. Were we on the actual trail the whole time? I don't know.
No.
Probably not. But,
it's the first hat show. What's going on with the hat?
The hat?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I've been. It's funny because you're not the first person to ask me about the hat, because normally I don't wear baseball hats, but I've been wearing them a lot, and it's because I just haven't been going to the barbers, so it's a way of keeping this mess that's hidden under here in some sort of shape. And typically before I come here, I take a quick shower, rush up here. Didn't have time because of the kids this morning.
Yep.
So this is keeping things a little bit contained. If you're wondering about the specifics. Rancho Gordo is like a heritage bean farmer supplier. Really, really great, fresh, like the weird beans that have all these like beautiful, like they look like jewels.
Yeah.
And the guy, Steve Sandow, who started, is a great, he has some good cookbooks. So if you're into beans, if you're into heritage beans and craft beans, Rancho Gordo is the place to be.
I should have guessed it was coffee related.
It's so no, it's not coffee related. Oh. It's like actual beans.
Oh, actual
like
beans.
Kidney beans.
Oh, I see.
And it's so popular that they have this like a subscription service. And if you want to get on that subscription service and start getting their heritage beans once every month or whatever, it's like a 2-year waiting list.
Oh my God.
Yeah, foodies and chefs, everybody loves this guy. Anyways, I don't know why we're talking about beans. The walking is interesting because our guest today is James Mabry. He's the president of Middlesex Community College. And you're sort of an adventure guy, and you've had an adventurous past for sure. I want to talk a little bit about your early days before you came to the community college, and then we have a lot to talk about in terms of education. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. You're looking great. I love that hat.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm going for the beans as soon as I can.
Yeah. Hey, if you like beans, if you like a nutritious plant-based source of protein, check out Rancho Gordo. This is not an advertisement. They're not paying us, everybody. So you cycle now, right?
That's correct. Yes.
I think Glenn Prezano, the publisher of the magazine, so we did the kayaking story last year where I was going to go the entire length of the Merrimack River. And then he wanted me to go with you, I think, on like a long distance cycling trip. Do you do long distances?
I haven't done a lot of long distance. It's mostly been, training rides, because I also swim and run besides biking. So long rides are hard to fit in.
Yeah, there's this. I've heard before, so I kind of have to ask you this because you fit this model, right? Is people in leadership positions tend to be into endurance sports for reasons that we don't understand. Like I had like a wrestling background.
It's an
I did
interesting
boxing. It's like
observation.
everything is
Yeah.
sprinting, fast, fast, fast. And but you see this across the boards when you meet leaders and ask them what they do. They tend to do stuff that's like not grindy, you know what I mean, but like just endurance, the stuff that would make
Yep.
me miserable. I'm just wondering what the psychology is like. What draws you to those type of activities?
Well, I think it's one of those where your mindset has to be that you actually love the training.
Yeah,
You like getting out there and pushing yourself physically, and that can be both speed and endurance to see how far you can go and how fast you can go. And it just is, let's say, it's one of those healthy obsessions.
sure,
So it keeps you going, and we all find as we gradually get up there in years, it's about keeping yourself going, and that this really helps manage sort of both your stress levels and your quality of life.
sure. So there's a meditative component to it.
Absolutely, a long bike ride, absolutely meditative.
Yeah, but you also have to keep kind of giving yourself goals or putting things in place to keep it interesting or like, oh, I really ought to push myself and do this thing that I've never done before.
Absolutely. So let's see. Last year, I did my first half Ironman race up in Lake Placid, New York. So
So what's for those of us who don't know what a half Ironman race is? What is that? What does that involve? And what was the experience like for you?
a 1.2 mile open water swim, and then a 56-mile bike ride, and then a half marathon, 13-mile run.
Okay, a mere half marathon.
Yeah.
How do you sleep when that's over? Is it easy to sleep or is it harder?
It is very easy to sleep.
And what are you doing this whole time for like food? Are you like eating like weird sci-fi gels or like how do you keep yourself fueled during this experience?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things you have to learn is over a long race like that is how do you keep your body going? Because your body will deplete its energy resources within an hour and a half or 2 hours. And anything over that, you have to have a steady refueling strategy throughout it. So it's both what you put in your drink bottles and then, gels and bars that you're eating. You eat a lot on your bike ride, actually.
Sure. So were you always into endurance type sports or did that come at a certain point in your life?
It's sort of two phases. I swam in high school and into college, my first stint at college, and then I got away for it from a number of years, went through my, unhealthy years, and then eventually looked at myself one day and said, oh, I think I need to do something here. And, uh, and it was cycling that got me back into better shape.
Hmm.
I was literally at a New Year's Day party where this one guy said, "Oh, every year I do the New York City Century. It's a 100-mile bike ride in New York City. Why don't you come do it with us next year?"
Yeah.
And I said, "What do I have to do to get ready for that?" He goes, "You get 1,000 miles in your legs, you'll be fine." So that ride's in September, and this was January 1st, and I just said, "I'm going to do this."
Wow.
And it took me a long time to get in shape to do that. But I had a great, 100-mile ride with him and a couple other friends that day in New York City and kind of kept going from there.
Wow. Are you systematic in your approach when you do something like that? Do you like, okay, this day I'm going to do 7.2 miles and then I'll build up? Or is it more intuitive?
I have a very definite plan that I never quite stick to.
There you go. That's the way to do it. So you mentioned your first stint in college. Does this mean there were multiple stints in college for you?
It's interesting, as you said, I work at a community college, and we have a lot of students who, for some reasons of their own and some reasons not of their own making, they have a very crooked path through higher education. So I always talk to them that it took me three colleges and 10 years to get my bachelor's degree which always gets them laughing, which is great, because they think, okay, you're the president of the college, you were the smart guy. But in high school, I was not the most academic person. And I could not get into a state university in New York coming out of high school. I had to go to Ohio because they let me in and put me on a swimming scholarship there. But it was, that lasted a year. And then I decided I had no idea what I was doing, and it was better to wait until I had some clear idea.
Yeah. So when did the clear ideas start coming?
Well, I went off and worked. I actually picked up an associate's degree while I was working as a civilian for the Air Force in Germany. And then, after that stint, I eventually decided I was going to come back to the U.S. and go back to school. Took me another, 2 years to sort of put that plan in action. And then I finally got back into college. So that was my third stint. I still have no idea why Columbia University let me in, but that really changed the course of my career because they made some significant demands of my time and my intellect and made me work pretty damn hard.
Yeah. So what were you when you were at Columbia? What were you studying?
My undergraduate major was in political science. So I really focused on political theory and wrote a senior thesis on the political theory of the American Revolution. So coming to this area was kind of fun.
Sure, absolutely. So when was this about? When you were at Columbia?
Late 1970s.
Late 1970s. And what was New York like at that time?
Pretty wild and crazy.
Yeah.
So I always claim I got two educations because to pay my living expenses while I was at school, I drove a taxi for 3 years in New York City.
Wow.
And I got one education in the classroom and one on the street.
Wow. So at what point do you, I mean, obviously you're drawn at some point into thinking in terms of being an educator or something having to do with education. So when does that come about? How does the path lead in that direction?
Shortly after I graduated, I met this lovely young woman while bicycle riding in Central Park on a Sunday morning.
It's always a woman. It's always a woman.
They're the ones who straighten us out, right?
Yeah.
I decided, okay, I really have to go, find a job. And I started teaching high school in the public school system in New York City. I taught it for 3 years in two different high schools and learned a tremendous amount about working with diverse students, about working with students from low-income backgrounds. And that really set me on a course where I wanted to create a career that would really keep me involved in serving the community in that sense. So there were a number of years in between when I finished teaching at high school and then started teaching at a community college. I was following my wife around and raising two daughters for a few years. And we moved several times, three trips overseas during that for her career. And once we settled back down, I took a one-semester job teaching at a community college. And I just completed a PhD at that point and thought I'd give this a shot. And by the end of the semester, I knew that's where I wanted to stay.
If you don't mind me asking, why was your wife moving around so much? Was she in the military or what sort of occupation?
She was working in finance. So we lived briefly in Tokyo and then two different stints in London for a total of 7 years.
I mean, that must be tough to lead a sort of semi-nomadic existence with two daughters. Are there particular challenges? No, or you like it?
I think it was a tremendous opportunity. There were certainly challenges involved in that, but I also think it really opened the world to my kids who got to see things and experience things and became more adaptive in different environments. So they they still consider, some of these special places in their lives and places they like to go back and places they still have friends.
Yeah. So how does this all lead to Arizona, which is where you lived, I believe, before Lowell, before the Merrimack Valley?
Okay, so I took a one semester job teaching economics in the Hudson Valley of New York.
Hmm.
And then took me 2 years to get a full-time teaching job. I taught for another 2 years, got asked to move to administration, spent 4 years as an associate dean, and then decided I wanted to move up in my career. So I took a job as a dean in Palm Beach, Florida. So I was actually in Boca Raton, Florida for 2 years. Then I took a job as a VP of academic affairs in Arizona at another community college. So community colleges in New York, Florida, Arizona, and I saved the best for last, coming to Massachusetts.
Yeah. I have to ask you your thoughts on Arizona because I think like the pandemic has sort of changed everybody. And I noticed one of the strange things that's happened to me mentally is I start dreaming about living in places where I've never thought of before. And I don't know if it's because I happen to be reading writers who are writing from those areas. I don't know what it is. I've always loved New England. I've always loved the North. I love the winter. So it's not uncommon for me throughout my life to think, I should move to Maine or Vermont, right? But I've never wanted to move to Arizona until this year, where I've never lived in the desert. I've never lived. I don't know. And now I suddenly have this kind of weird longing. What was Arizona like?
I have to say that the desert was fascinating. I mean, my wife and I are both from New York. She's from the city, and I grew up upstate. But it was certainly an adventure in the sense of the climate and the topography and the landscape and just the colors. It's a lot of shades of brown and red, and not near so much green, but it's more subtle. And if you pay attention to it, it can be really fascinating. Walking in the desert, even some of the bike riding I did was very interesting. But it was, it was so different that part of it was really fascinating. And we actually found the heat easier to get used to than we anticipated. So we enjoyed that part of our time in Arizona, absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. So I have to now ask you about the one thing you asked me not to ask you about, which is the motorcycling, because you bring up cycling and adventuring. But at a certain point, you were into motorcycles, and you actually spent some serious time in Europe, motorcycling across Europe. Is that right?
So after I decided that I wasn't ready for college, I worked for a year to save up some money and went to England and bought in those days, the hot bike was a Norton.
Yeah.
So I bought a Norton motorcycle, and I thought I'd be home in 2 months, and came home 4 years later.
Yeah.
So, I traveled to both Europe and North Africa, and as far east as Greece, and in those days, Yugoslavia. And then eventually ended up working on an Air Force base in Germany for about 3 years.
So what was driving you? Were you thinking of, because it seems so writerly to me. It seems like, oh, this is something a writer would do, right? And you would kind of take notes and you would venture. Like, what were you looking for? Like, were you recording this experience in any way?
I was, and I can show you the slides if I can ever find the projector. So it's, the technologies were so different. I wouldn't say I was much of a writer, but I've always read voraciously and was reading throughout that. You found that some places it's harder to find an English language bookstore. It was in those days, but the travelers' campgrounds would be filled with people exchanging books. Oh, what have you got? And I'll trade you this for that. And it kept the library updated while I was, on the bike for about 4 months.
Yeah. So there was a literary component. So and it's great to have a reader on. I love to talk books. You say you read voraciously. Who are your favorite writers, and what are you reading now?
At the moment, I'm reading, it's interesting because I'm reading a book that's directly connected to my living in Germany. So It's a book called Broken Lives, and it's about Germans who grew up in the 1920s, were born in the 1920s, and really came of age as Nazi Germany was taking shape.
Yeah.
And then they live, some of them, through the war and come out the other side, some in East Germany, some in West Germany. And it portrays their lives by going through a whole series of amateur autobiographies that apparently became a thing in that generation. And this historian has gone through a whole group of these self-written or self-published autobiographies and followed and then done the background research in it to really explore this era. And my interest came in this is one day I was working on an Air Force base in Germany, and one of the Germans that I worked with walked in that morning and said, "Oh, today's the 30th anniversary of the day I got shot by the Americans." And then he walked out of the room. And you're standing there going, okay, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
I'm 22, 23 years old at the time, not that much experience. And so I finally had to track him down and get his story. And he talked about how he'd been thrown into the war in 1945. He was 16 years old, no training. And basically he was running for his life, trying to get home. He was happy to have a minor wound to get captured by the Americans, because the last thing you wanted to be captured by was the Soviet forces in those days. And, he got patched up, treated pretty well, and eventually returned home as the war ended quite quickly there. So you start from those stories, and with my background in history as well, I was really interested in understanding this era a bit better. And this book really attracted me because partly of my past experience and partly my love of history.
Sure. So, favorite writers?
Well, that varies during your age.
Sure.
So what I rode around Europe, of course, I had to be reading the appropriate authors at that time and going
which is what, like Alan Watts or something like that, or like what was?
I had to go run with the bulls in Pamplona.
Okay. Oh, right. There you go.
Yeah, and read my Hemingway, and then read the Beat Generation and read Kerouac, and enjoy On the Road.
Yeah.
And stories like that.
Well, so that must have put your journey here to this region, into Lowell in particular, into an interesting context, because you were familiar with the beats and you were familiar with the literary past in this area.
That, and also sort of, you could say, the industrial past there. So after my undergraduate degree, I did a master's at London School of Economics, and then came back and did my PhD in economic history at Columbia. And I really looked at industrialization, growth of business, technology change, and things like that. So Lowell played a critical role in that. So my first trip to Lowell was, in a sense, like a blast from the past for me. I'd read a lot about it, but I'd never been here. So looking at the canals and the waterways and the old factories, and having explored some of that history now in the national park, it's been quite fascinating. But the literary side is still there. I don't get quite as much time to read as I used to.
Sure. Yeah.
It's always fun.
Yeah. So let's move into talking about education and community colleges, and I'm just going to start throwing out some big issues. What are the important? And this is so big, maybe it's too big to digest. But what's the role of a community college right now in 2020? Why are they important?
Well, it's important for the core of our mission, which is about open access and good value. So we are there to help students no matter where they're coming from or where they're going. So we have students coming in who have just learned English or are just learning English and then transition into credit courses. And we have students who go through and then transfer to MIT in math the next after 2 years. So a very broad range of students, coming to community colleges because they're close to home. They're relatively inexpensive. We have small classes. Our faculty are people who love to teach and be in the classroom. We don't do research. We're a teaching institution. And so we focus on our students and student success. That's really at our core. So now, more than ever, students who are trying to stay on that path to an education, trying to really change their lives by going to school and learning more skills and increasing their knowledge, this is a place they can start, a place they can return to, a place they can continue at a relatively modest cost.
How has COVID and everything that's happened this year changed the nature of community colleges?
Well, last March, when the pandemic really struck, we had to move off campus within 2 weeks and move all our teaching, learning, and work to remote locations, which most people were working from home. The good news on that was we've been teaching online for 20 years, and almost all our full-time faculty were very accomplished online teachers. We just had a lot of work to move extra courses on and to get things ready to move and really upgrade our support systems for faculty and students so that we could serve them in virtual environments.
Yeah. What about the students in terms of, you talk about open access? Is it much more difficult for students who might be kind of struggling financially? Was it harder for them to adapt to this remote learning?
For some students, yes. Not everybody has a laptop. Not everybody has internet at home. We purchased 250 Chromebooks and lent them out to students that needed them. We did the same with hotspots, which are just connected to the cell network, so that we could make sure that our students were able to continue to access their course materials online. We opened up some computer labs for students who needed to come in and use a computer. We started using more simulation software for our labs. We provided faculty and staff with special tokens that give them secure remote access into our system. So there was a tremendous amount of work to move the college offline in a short period of time, and the faculty and staff did a tremendous job of that.
Yeah. My sense of things as an outsider is that it's never easy with community colleges, right? You're always kind of like fighting for funding and it's always just a war, right? But I'm wondering if there are, and once again, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm wondering if there are particular advantages to community colleges, particular to this period in American history. And I'm thinking in particular of something Lou mentioned right before the show, housing. Like, you're not reliant on housing revenue, are you?
No, we are commuter schools, you could say. Our students are extremely local. So studies have shown that community college students, 90% will come from within 5 miles of the campus. So we are very attuned and tucked into our communities. We respond to our communities and their needs. We help produce really the core of the workforce in this economy, whether you're talking nurses, dental hygienists, IT workers. These are the ones that are coming out of the community colleges. A lot of the frontline workers, we said nurses, CNAs in nursing homes. We have students, in the healthcare field all over the place. Every time I end up in emergency, I get help by somebody from the community college.
Yeah. So given how not dire, I don't know what the word is. Given how it's easy to become cynical, it's easy to become a little bit pessimistic right now. Given what we're facing, is there anything over the next, say, year that people should be excited about? They should be aware of this. This is kind of new thing that's coming, or these new initiative. Is there anything going on that excites you?
Yes. What I would say is that we are really starting to catch up with our students in use of technology. So we are finding that they're just fine with virtual advising sessions. because they're used to talking to people on a screen. They've lived, in these virtual environments since they were kids or their entire lives. So many of our students don't need to come to campus for us to be able to give them the services, the advice, and the help that they need. So we have had to adapt to that and learn that. And I think that our staff have done that, our support staff have done that in a very quick way to do that. So the advantage we have, I think, is that we're nimble, we're very quick, we're very focused on our students. So what they need, we will find a solution for very quickly. We decided, as I mentioned earlier, in May to be almost fully online by the fall. This gave us the whole summer to plan, to communicate with our students, and to set up all the support services we need to do this in a really high quality way. We're not jumping into this now. We're completely ready for it. So this is something where if you are looking for an alternative now because your four-year school or your out-of-state school is closed and you don't want to sit at home and pay really high prices for online courses, come to your local community college. We'll be there for you with a high-quality program, high-quality support services, and be there to help you through.
Yeah. So you announced earlier this year that you're going to retire in 2021. Is that correct?
Yes.
So so that will be like 6 years when all is said and done. You've been here for 6 years.
That's it. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what's why did you decide to retire at this point?
Okay, I decided because in 2021 I'll turn 70 years old, and if I'm going to get to the Kona World Triathlon Championship, I need some training time here. Let's face it. So, no, mostly it's family. We have two grown daughters, and who are starting their own families. One has a appropriately rampaging 14-month-old. In their household, and our younger daughter is due with her first child in October. We would like to be a bigger part of their lives and be able to help them as they start their families. So
yeah, and I'm sorry, maybe you mentioned it and I missed it. Are they local?
They both live in the Washington, D.C. area.
Okay, so does the nomadic path continue when you retire? Are you going to move to D.C.?
I believe we will. Yes.
Okay. So this will continue on. The road continues on.
Yeah, maybe one more stop there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So so now you're heading into your last year. I'm sure you've had time to reflect. What were you proudest of as far as accomplishments at MCC?
Well, I think that we've done a lot of catching up with our use of technology that have made us both more effective and more efficient in what we do. So the first semester I was at the college, we wrote a federal grant application for what's called the Title III Strengthening Institutions Grant. And we received $4.5 million over 5 years from that. And what that has done is set us on a course to bring in and train our faculty and staff in new technologies that really helped them, particularly when we had to go into this remote and virtual work environment. So a lot of people are reluctant to pick up new tools and try them. Not everybody. Some people, I've heard like you, Doug, just pick these things up naturally and love them all, right?
Sure. Try.
And so some of the folks would take the training but not use it. But when they had to, it was there. It was on their desktop. They were ready, and so it became really something they could use very effectively. So we've made great strides in the last 5 years in upgrading our technology systems that serve both our faculty, our staff, and our students.
Yeah. Anything you would have done differently?
Anything I think I'll have to wait until I completely leave the scene to think about that one.
All right. Yeah. Maybe you can come back and we'll reflect. Now, the last I checked, we don't know who the replacement is. Do you know who the replacement's going to be?
No, I announced really 14 months in advance to give the Board of Trustees enough time to really go through a proper national search process to bring in really the best possible replacement and have time for a systematic transition. So I really wanted to do this in a structured way that didn't leave any gaps for the institution.
That's right. So any advice to the person to assume the chair in 2021?
I think that it's always great to come in and get to know the communities you serve throughout the Merrimack Valley and down into Middlesex County through Bedford and all. I've met such a tremendous range of really supportive people, really interesting folks. And there are people who are very, very dedicated to their communities and who have they are people who've stayed their whole lives in Lowell or Bedford and really built their communities. But they've also been very welcoming to people like my wife and I have come in from outside with the same goal of how can we work together to strengthen our communities and get our kids a great education.
Yeah. So, Lou, do you have any questions for James Mabry?
Yeah, I do. I want to go back to your American Revolution studies and your interest in that. And I'm going to do something no one should ever do. I'm going to equate Nazi Germany with the American Revolution and current day America. But I'm a minimally paid professional, so I think I can pull this off.
We'll see.
Can't wait.
And I'm going to do it without getting political. You talked about reading that book and talking about your experience in Germany. And this is dealing with people who grew up, had lifetimes in Germany prior to the Nazis, during the coming of the Nazi regime, and post-Nazi Germany. And here in the Northeast, we had a similar experience with the American Revolution. There was pre-revolution, there was the revolution, then there was early America. And I'm a New England native, and I walk streets where George Washington walked and John Quincy Adams walked, and I see houses that were built before the American Revolution. And I still feel in this area, we still ring with the American Revolution. In other words, we're still connected to that somehow. Talk about big societal changes like that in the context of the American Revolution and what it does for New England. As an outsider, do you still feel the echoes of the American Revolution here in New England?
Even I feel the echoes of really the colonial era. So I live in the town of Bedford. We do not have a representative democracy. We have direct democracy in this town. We have town meeting.
Yep.
That doesn't exist in other parts of the United States. And this is really a direct heritage of the people who came here, from the Puritans who didn't want any authority over the church except their local parish. They didn't want an authority over their local community, so they had town meeting. So they were very independent, very local. And that culture still exists in Massachusetts. You'll find people who talk about they moved 3 miles away and they act like they moved to another planet.
Right.
You know,
That's the Merrimack Valley. If you live in Haverhill and people start talking about Lowell, it's a 10-minute drive and it feels like it's another planet.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see that culture. But you're right, that spirit of the American Revolution and that history is still here. Been up and down Battle Road a number of times. It made me go back, and it's a great book on Paul Revere, Paul Revere's Ride. This is not fantasy. This was a serious work of history, and really fascinating to read that and then actually walk down some of the same streets and bicycle some of the same roads that Paul Revere came down.
Yeah, my town has a church with a Paul Revere bell in it still that I walk through.
Yeah.
Now, as you look at American society today and you look at the news and you look at the newspapers and you see what's going on, are there any of these signs of these types of eras, like you talked about Nazi Germany, where this was a huge change in culture, a revolution of sorts, and a major, profound change in the culture? It was the same thing in colonial America. Are there any signs of this now? Are we on the verge of a huge cultural change in this country? Or is this just the machinations of a representative democracy? I mean, it was this way in the 1800s. It was this way during the Civil War and pre-Civil War. Of course, is this just being Americans, or are we really on the precipice of something here?
Well, America's been through a number of revolutions, not just the one in 1776. You know, whether you look at the Gilded Age or whether you look at the Great Depression, or you work, coming out of the Great Depression in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and the growth that went on there. And now from 2000 on, we've seen another shift really in our economy, and the widening inequality that is really shaping both the economy and politics in this country. So this is a fascinating country because it continues to evolve and go through cycles, and it's hard to compare them directly one with another. There are some common aspects to American culture and American politics that run through it, but it is not immutable.
All right, I can say, as you can tell in this conversation, I kind of consider myself a son of the revolution, having grown up in New England, and walked the streets with the same people, heard all the tales. It's part of who we are now. Mm-hmm. Tell us your favorite, when you sit down at the cocktail party and they find out you studied the American Revolution, we're into it so deeply. What's your favorite American Revolution story that not everybody knows?
I like the fact that Paul Revere actually got captured and never quite made it to Concord.
Yes.
And the young man who alerted Concord was somebody that he and Dawes had run into. The man was coming back from a date in Lexington and actually had the freshest horse. So when they got captured by the British cavalry, he took off and got away, and they did not.
Yep.
So that's how Concord got alerted that the British were coming.
All right, going back to community college and the role of community college, I have a son just finishing up at UVM and put a daughter through college, and I think people are missing the biggest value of community college here in this age of the expense of higher education. You don't need to do 4 years at a prestigious college to get that prestigious degree that's going to help in some industries and in some professions. There's no reason you can't get your gen ed and do some work at community colleges. And then, as you talked about, someone going to MIT after doing some math at Middlesex, this has to be the path for people. People have to understand the role of community college and its value a little bit more, because that's a great way to get a prestigious degree and not be tremendously burdened with debt when they leave an MIT or any of the prestigious universities.
You're hired. You said it absolutely perfectly. It is a great value, and you really can go anywhere starting at a community college.
And if they go with, and I'm not suggesting that Middlesex Community College is not prestigious to any degree, but someone leaves MIT with a degree, no one's concerned that they got a couple math courses at Middlesex Community College.
I don't think they're going to look at that. In fact, that would probably make them, the people would look at that and say, this is somebody with some real resilience and some real grit.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit before the show about my attempts to buy a bicycle early on in COVID, and it's pretty much impossible. If you go to the bike shops, they're empty, and you either can get really, really high end or stuff that's so low end it's not going to be appropriate for somebody like me. But I hope before you leave for wherever life takes you that we have a chance to ride together, because I think it would make for a great bike ride and maybe an interesting story for the magazine. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate. Guest today has been James Mabry, president of Middlesex Community College. James, thank you so much.
Great to see you, and I'm looking forward to that ride.
Absolutely.